Hi, everyone. Welcome.
Thank you.
We're going to take a couple minutes and let everybody get into the room here.
Got a pencil and paper?
Um, we're so glad that so many of you are joining us today. We're very excited about this.
I think we've got pretty much everybody coming in, and we'll just let we'll admit other people as they come in. So if we want to go ahead and get started.
That's great. I will take our screen share down so that we can spotlight Linda.
Hello to each and every one of you. On behalf of the staff and people involved in bringing this presentation to you, we welcome you. We thank you for choosing to set aside this time to learn more about the impacts of the forced removal of children from their families and homes, placed with strangers in boarding schools, and the aftermath. My name is Reverend Linda Smith. I'm enrolled at Tulalip Tribes. I'm a retired Lutheran pastor. We will begin today with a land acknowledgement, followed by a blessing by Mark Kremen, enrolled at Skokomish, then our speakers, followed by a Q&A. Because of the great response, we will be using the chat only for Q&A. We appreciate all of your questions and comments. However, we will not be able to answer all of the questions submitted. Hopefully, some of the answers will be addressed by our presenters. We will provide additional information to some websites that may answer your specific questions. Our three speakers today are James Praying Wolf, Jewell Praying Wolf James, Jewell. He is an enrolled member of Lummi Nation. He is an internationally known carver with the House of Tears Carvers. He has served in a variety of leadership capacities in Lummi Nation, including Tribal Council, Fisheries Director, Sovereignty and Treaty Protection Office. Today, he will be speaking to us on his experience as a student survivor at an Indian boarding school. Our second speaker, Theresa Sheldon, is a citizen of Tulalip Tribes. She's an advocate for historical justice, civil engagement, upholding and strengthening treaty sovereignty, and the trust responsibility of protecting sacred space. Currently, she is a member of the board of directors at Tulalip, and she will be speaking on the role of the National Native American Boarding School Healing Coalition from her experience as a director of policy and advocacy. Our third speaker is Edward Washines. Edward is an enrolled member of the Confederated Tribes and Bands of the Yakama Nation. He is a respected elder, having served 42 years with the Yakama Nation, including 10 years as a member of the Tribal Council. He was a professor of Native American Studies. He graduated from Riverside Indian School in Oklahoma, and today he will be speaking about his participation as a member of the Washington State Truth and Reconciliation Tribal Advisory Committee out of the Office of the Attorney General. All of our speakers come with rich heritage and life in Indian country. A land acknowledgement. We acknowledge the original inhabitants of this area, the Coast Salish people. Since time immemorial, they have hunted, fished, gathered, and taken care of these lands. We respect their sovereignty, their right to self-determination, and honor their sacred spiritual connection with the land and water. We will strive to be honest about our past mistakes and bring about a future that includes their people, stories, and voices for a more just and equitable society. Mark, will you pray the blessing for us now, please?
Ye wasti Felicitibus, he did not just follow us. The Kaya, the Sila, the Sodai, Bad, Kakakchas, Bek Siaya Chas, Baskas, the Siaya, the Dis, Felicitibad Dias, the Pish, a Kakakchas, Felicitibad Chit Dias. Oh God, we are gathered together. Women, grandmothers, grandfathers, fathers, children. To all people I pray. I pray for our time. Stand by us. Be with us. Every child is sacred. I ask this. Amen.
Thank you, Mark. Jewell, we'll begin with you. We're looking forward to your words.
Now?
Yes.
All right. My name is Jewell James. I'm from the Lummi Indian Reservation here in the state of Washington. I was born and raised on a Lummi Reservation back during the era of termination. The government was continuing to try to make us leave the reservation, relocate our people into the cities. And they were promising jobs and education, but most of the people that did leave the reservation ended up in pockets of sovereignty in the inner city environment. They were just relocated into other minority groups. And, you know, they spent about 30 years suffering there and a lot of poverty. But before that, before I ever got involved in tribal politics, I was one of those kids that encountered a lot of racism in local city, and we're always in a lot of street fights trying to defend ourselves because there was a lot of hatred towards Native Americans. And later on, that hatred would even become worse when we finally won our U.S. v. Washington fishing rights back. The local towns had a lot of teachers that were fishermen that started targeting our student populations for animosity. But being as it may, when I was 14, I got attacked by 6 adults, and I beat them all in a street fight. But we did end up getting arrested, and they dropped all charges against me because everybody testified that it was the adults that attacked me, and I was only defending myself, even though the others, they got hurt. But I was held all day by the detective, and he told me that I was going down the wrong path and I should find a way out of it. And I should really save myself from having a future reputation as a felon. And so I talked to my parents, and we talked to tribal elders, and I got shipped off to a boarding school in Oklahoma. I went to Fort Sill Indian Boarding School. And the whole goal was to try to learn not to fight and not to have what we experience we call reverse racism. I thought it'd be a lot better in an all Indian environment. But young people will be young people, and they'll find a reason to hate you, and they'll find a reason to fight with you. And so I end up in a lot of fights in boarding school. I was there for about a year and a half when I became seriously ill. And during that time, when I was in boarding school, back in 69 and 70, there was a crackdown on violence against the students by staff. And so I didn't see a lot of violence coming from the staff at all. More violence from the student population. But what they did when you became sick is they just locked you up in isolation. And I almost died. I ended up in the hospital there twice. And because of that, I ended up being forced to come home, even though I liked the boarding school experience, because coming from a poverty-stricken home, I had my own bed, my own room. I had that I shared with a couple other students, but also I had 3 meals a day, and I was able to focus on my studies. And so for me, because I was an aggressive individual, I didn't see anybody really attacking me like a lot of the older generation experience sexual violence, things of that nature. But we do, as I grew up, I realized that there's a lot of tribal members that had gone to boarding schools as a result of the federal policy to kill the Indian to save the man. And the churches were involved in this extensively. So it was a federal program where they cooperated with a lot of churches, and a lot of churches took over our created federal boarding schools for Native Americans. And when we're, for example, when we're down at Chemawa, we went through the cemetery there, and there are little children buried there, little brothers buried side by side. They took the little boys, these little toddlers, right out of the arms of their mother and put them in boarding school to Christianize them, to turn them into little white versions of what an Indian should be. And they died there. And a lot of children that died in boarding schools, the parents never saw them. A lot of times they didn't even get a report that their child died. So, they could only assume their child survived and went on. And we paid attention to some of the findings that was taking place in Canada more recently, where there was the Canadian reconciliation with the Native American populations up there. And I had been working with the Lummi tribe for over 4 decades. And one of my concerns with, since I have a psychology background and political science background and studied a lot of law, I was really concerned about what are the rights of our Indigenous peoples in regards to recovery. And so I did a lot of studies and research on the chaos created by historical trauma, generational trauma, and a lot of trauma that came from the boarding schools. I have witnessed, for example, a family where the father went through boarding school, and he pretty much molested all of his sons and daughters and his nieces and nephews, and he was damaged goods from his boarding school experience. And this happened to a lot of young men young boys that couldn't defend themselves. They went on to become abusers themselves. But a lot of the experience tied with the federal policies on Indians was that they wanted to destroy our spirituality. They wanted to destroy our extended family community. They wanted to destroy our traditional housing systems. They wanted to destroy our relationship to the land and the air and the water around us. They did everything they could to destabilize our individual and our collective psyche, our orientations to each other and our orientations to the land and the natural resources around us. And so think of it like a spider web. There are several main strands that go to the environment that connect you. And those strands might be your spirituality, your traditional culture, your language, your family patterns, your housing systems, your work, traditional work, and all traditional language. These are all main strands of a tribal community. The government purposely went in and plucked those strands off. And the lines that go around the spider web, that's the way that you share traditional knowledge. The Lummi people call it snup. in order to be a solid, full person, you had to have schnupp. You had to have the teachings of not only how to live with society and lead it, but also how you relate to everything around you. These were usually passed down through family, extended family, and reinforced in the community. And so the government came in and undermined all that in order to destroy who we were. And so I was so much involved in the defense of tribal fishing rights and took on a national campaign to stop the IRS from taxing treaty fishermen. And during that time, I seen the churches historic involvement. I always kept thinking about how they were involved in the destruction of our Native American world, and I didn't want to work with them anymore. And as a consequence of intra-tribal debate, we reached out to the churches, and I had to express to them the animosity I felt towards them for the damages they'd done to our children and our community. And that led to the apology of churches that was issued in my name back in 1987. The churches renewed it. They're saying, we're sorry. We were involved in the destruction of who you are culturally, traditionally, as a people. And if we weren't directly involved as an individual church, we passively sat back and allowed it to happen and failed to defend you. And so that was pretty much the apology. And they renewed it in 2007 and 2017, 1987, 1997, and 2007, but not in 2017. And so they kind of fell away from it. And so that was a short-lived apology. And that's one of the things I anticipate is that you don't really mean it. You're not really going to be too involved to help us uncover or undo the trauma that's been forced upon our children, our families, and our community. And you're going to put on a show. That's the way I viewed it. And the thing is that watching what happened in Canada, Henry Kagi and we asked the HNI to pass a resolution to start the debates on what is going to happen about the historical trauma from boarding schools that took place here in the United States, that Canada took action. What are you going to do? And of course, that resolution passed that went on to NCAI. And I thank God that people like the elders like Patsy Whitefoot from Yakama. What happened is that a group of tribal elders, tribal women came forward and took hold of the boarding school initiative, and they turned it into a national campaign. And I have proposed, because while I was active as a treaty rights advocate, indigenous rights advocate, and actively engaged in trying to protect our Native American religious freedom, I was also aware that we need to do something to get the voices out to the people on the concerns that we have in regards to the damages done to us, and how this damage to us has caused and authorized basically damages to the world and the environment around us, and that we need to speak out on these things. So we began these totem pole journeys. And they've been fairly successful as we went up into Canada and all across the United States. And, I even used those totem pole journeys to argue with the IRS that you can't be taxing ceremonial activities. And that became part of the 2014 Tribal General Welfare Exclusions Act. But they were after me personally. And from 2010 to 2019, I was battling them and losing the case over and over. But in the end, I won, and the IRS National Indian Office ruled that Native American art is ceremonial activity. Now, see, the thing is that you got song, you got dance, you got ceremony, you got ritual, you got colors, you got forms and symbols. These are all tied to our sacred relationship with the world around us. It reminds us that we have the sacred contract with nature. Well, this is the type of schnupp that we want our children to have. These are the type of teachings our children need in order to be stabilized. But all the forces of society, government, and politics has worked against us. The laws have worked against us. And so it's been a long-term struggle for us to recover what was taken away from us. And at the same time, try to deal with the trauma that the boarding schools had institutionalized into our tribal communities. Reconciliation is important, and I really appreciate the influence and involvement that Deborah Parker and Theresa Sheldon from Tulalip have taken upon their shoulders to work with our national group and start guiding us towards us work and relationships with the United States on holding the United States, and I hope the church is accountable for the damage it's done. It's not going to happen overnight, and I think we're going to have to debrief the Canadian leadership as to how their reconciliation and settlement has helped or impact our community. Because one thing about it is that there's a trauma can be reactivated almost on a daily basis. And once you activate their trauma, push their trauma triggers, what are you going to do to help them overcome the psychophysiological damage that trauma does to their body and their ability to operate? And so I think if we did I propose that we do a national totem pole journey where we bring a major piece of art to all the big tribes and ask them to fund our national board and their activities, but also that we challenge SAMHSA to come forward and say, what are you going to do to directly help Native American communities on the reservation? Now, there's a lot of studies on historical trauma, generational trauma, and especially the trauma from the experience of boarding schools, or even the destruction of our Native American spiritual practices. And all those have to be addressed. And I think that we're wise enough, we're smart enough, we can organize and plan a recovery that's really going to impact the child at home. What are you going to do to save that little 4-year-old that is being subjected to generational historical trauma? Chaos. You know, we have right and left, the Lummi Nation has seen a lot of young people dying from fentanyl, you know, from a drug addiction. Before that, it was alcoholism, you know, and Native American Indian communities have the highest teenage suicide rates in the country. And you know, that's the same history and the same statistical fact that was associated with the communities up in Canada, the Native communities. And we have to recognize that the United States was the role model for Canada, New Zealand, and Australia. And all 4 of those countries have examples in this history of how they traumatized the indigenous peoples. I was involved in the UN debates on a United Nations Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And I was always, the United States was one of the last holdouts, and under the Obama administration, they accepted it in 2007. And I'm proud to say that I drafted the original paper that went to the Indian Law Resource Center to put more legalese into it rather than political language. And with that, Obama accepted the obligations of the UN Declaration. And included in all that is some of the problems that we have with all these areas where we've been attacked on culture and community and sense of identity, and how the federal and state governments and other colonial forces that have impacted us should be responding as we guide them on how we want to establish and develop systems of recovery. The boarding school experience is not going to go away overnight. We're going to need a lot of strategic development of a system that will work, and where we can work hand in hand with entities like SAMHSA and universities to develop systems where we're really helping them overcome the trauma that has been institutionalized as part of our community. Now, I know there's a lot of people that have gone through the disruptions to family systems, you know, and I've gone to places like Africa and Brazil and Chile and Peru and Mexico and Guatemala and Australia, and you know, and where we go, we see the same forces where the churches and colonial governments have done everything they could to destroy our sacred identity. We had a relationship, you know, and here in the Pacific Northwest, we would harvest natural resources for 3 months and then dedicate 9 months to ceremony and ritual. This is what the quote SNUP, unquote SNUP, was all about, is that how do you relate to the world around you? Well, how we relate now is through the lens of chaos and through the pain of trauma. And so I hope that we're gonna get right behind a national board, all these elderly ladies and young women that are guiding us in our dialogues with the United States. But it really has to be multifaceted, and we really have to understand the different aspects of what trauma is and how it was institutionalized. And so we have to know where it began, and we have to know whether or not it's going to permanently end. And like I said, I was when I got into boarding school, one of the things that a lot of the other students were telling me that were 11th and 12th grade, I went in there when I was in the 9th grade, that the older students were saying is that, oh, you're lucky. They're cracking down on the violence the staff had towards the students. And so you're here when there's not going to be any violence put on you by them. And so just keep that in mind. And so I never forgot that, you know, and but I did learn that a lot of our people over time had moved away from what they call a traditional intertribal marriage system. Because at one time we married based on our own traditional knowledge and our quest to keep traditional indigenous ways of knowing within our families, extended families, and our communities. And we had arranged over thousands of years relationships with specific Salish nations that shared the same view of the world. But through the boarding school experience, we began to see our children as they matured in the boarding school system marrying into other tribes. And all of a sudden we had Sioux blood, we had Chippewa blood, we had Blackfeet blood, we had Navajo blood, we had Hopi blood, and we have a lot of other Native American tribes married in. And you know, that was a concern of the older Lummi generations on how our culture that we were able to save is changing. You know, they were trying to keep as much alive as they could. It's kind of like a full cup. Somebody pushed a cup over, and you quickly went in to try to recover the contents and shove it back into the cup, but it's only half full now. And then it gets pushed over again and again and again. And pretty soon you're really starting to feel the experience of being robbed. And so I really appreciate you calling to this dialogue on the impacts of boarding schools. And keep in mind, we have a long ways to go on addressing the trauma. How do we address the trauma in a way that is will really reach the majority of our people in our community? It's not just one-on-one counseling. It's something that has to reach the whole community and be accepted by them. And that's going to require us helping guide the dialogues, which the UN Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples says we have the right to do. Thank you for inviting me to be on this conversation. And I hope that anybody listening in will really pay close attention to the pain that is in all of our hearts over what happened. Thank you.
Thank you, Jewell. Words that sometimes are hard to hear, but are so important for everyone to know about. And we appreciate all that you have done on behalf of our brothers and sisters. Let's hear from Edward now.
Did we verify that Edward is in the room?
I don't think Edward has joined yet.
Yeah, I don't think he has either.
Let's-
And And is Theresa in the room? Okay. So Fred, can you hear me? Hang on, let me get a hold of.
Yes,
Okay,
I
we
can
also,
hear you.
oh, okay. Why don't you go ahead? Ladies and gentlemen, this is Fred Lane, also from Lummi Nation, and a Chamawa graduate, Indian school, boarding school graduate. And he's got some information he can share with us while we're waiting for Theresa and Edward. Go for it.
Oh.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Siamanis Jalacha. Sohila Quinisanat Tacho, Tiakaya Siamanis Jalacha, Sulcadab, Siamanis Jalacha. It's great to be here with each and every one of you from around the world, around the universe, all of our universalist relatives and friends and family. It's good to be here with you. Deb Cruz, thank you for making this and all the friends that are helping make this possible. And thank my elder, my Oksala, my teacher, Sasyath, raising my hands to you. Thank you for, it's just always a breath of fresh air to hear your knowledge and your teachings. And I really hold this to witness you today. And thank each and every one of you. My Indian name is Sulcadab. I'm number 11 of 12 in my family of the late Vernon and Nancy Lane, both of Lummi Nation. It's real traditional. Whenever you hear a lot of our indigenous people, we introduce ourselves. I am a Lummi tribal member. I'm a former council member. I served one term on the Lummi Nation Council. I've had the honor of working with Sasyath for the last 24 years, doing the totem pole journeys. Our friend Daryl Hilaire at Children of the Setting Sun Productions, if you're not following him, had these guys, my elders had this vision of doing the totem journeys. And so I've probably seen a lot of you around the country sharing our important messages. I'm a graduate of Chemawa Indian School. I'm proudly a Chemawa Brave, graduated in 1986. I also served on the Chemawa Indian School Board in the early 2000s. And like Sasya shared earlier about, the experience, our boarding school experience was very different as compared to the ancestors. I say that with the understanding of remembering the history. There's a lot of history that a lot of you are just beginning to understand and read about what happened in the boarding schools. And we're hearing a lot about our relatives in Canada and the Truth and Reconciliation. September 30th every year is Truth and Reconciliation Day. And our friends at the Native Boarding School Healing Coalition, Deborah Parker, Theresa Sheldon. I hope Theresa shows up here. But
She's here.
oh, wonderful! These are our relatives that are really helping us bring this awareness and helping to heal. This is a healing for me. It's a healing session to share just this little bit about what my boarding school experience was, and to hear what Jewell experienced. My father, the late Vernon Lane, also went to Chemawa, graduated in 1950. Dad talked about at Chemawa, they used to line up and march to breakfast. They used to all line up and march to lunch. They used to line up and march to dinner. This was their teachings back in the day. And Chemawa Indian School for me holds a very dear space in my heart. Again, we had 56 graduates in 1986. We come from all over the United States, Alaska, Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, Chicago, Illinois, Albuquerque. All of our friends, my friends come all up and down the coast. And so this is for me, my Chemawa family. And, but after, I completed, my tenure at Chemawa and came back home. I mentioned, earlier, about, being on the school board. And, as I got on the school board, I began to really learn Chemawa's history and the dark history of the school there at Forest Grove. And what you read in the history of Chemawa, it was founded the same year as Carlisle in 1880. My grandmother, Dora Williams Solomon, she was born in 1891. And so in much of my research, my grandmother was born, if you're from here in the Northwest, she was born on Orcas Island, and one of the last of that generation that was born on Orcas Island before we were all removed from the islands, San Juan, Orcas, Blakely, all the Saturna Island in Canada, all the islands. This was the removal process back in the late 1800s. And in my research at Chemawa, my friend Sue Ann Riddick, she's really the historian that I look up to, and Dolores Pigsley, she's the chairwoman of the Siletz tribe in Oregon. And we'd have these conversations, and Sue Ann, in her research in 1891, there were 31 children from San Juan Island brought to Chemawa Indian School. Okay, this ain't in history book, so this is what as we come from in our oral traditions, these are our oral stories. So this was right at that time that all those kids were taken from San Juan Island, from our families. If you know the history of American camp and the Canadian, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police there, but that was that removal process when the government came in, and that's where those kids were taken. I don't know if you can understand what it's like being these kids as young as 3 years old, all up through 12 years old. There was 31 of them that were brought to Chemawa, and they all came by rail. They were all brought into Bellingham and brought by rail. And at Chemawa, the train goes right through the old campus. And the reason I bring up my relatives and my ancestors in that story is because 3 of them are still buried there at exit 260 in Oregon. And so the next time you go by exit 260 at the Chemawa exit there, the school is the oldest continuously operated boarding school in the country. That history is of research of our friends that are helping to try and not only remember and preserve the history, but remember these stories, these important stories, and to remember that, you know, when we were at Chemawa, we were never allowed to. I mean, you'd never be able to go over to the cemetery, and as we went across the country with the totem pole journey, and our friend Theresa Sheldon was there. We came by Carlisle, and we came by we went by Haskell Indian School, in Lawrence, Kansas. And we went by Chemawa. And that was a wake-up call, because our totem journey was about acknowledging, recognizing, and honoring our 46th president for Deb Holland's appointment, Secretary Holland's appointment, and Theresa, Sheldon, and I. You know, that was just a little vision we had that really brought us to where we are today. And I'm sure Theresa can share with the Native Boarding School Healing Coalition. If you're not a member, go on to the NABS site and become a member, and learn a little bit. Learn a little bit from our relatives that are helping. You know, we're a friend of mine down in New Mexico. She's an elder. She's 73, and she also went to boarding school. Her experience, she got their mouth washed out, but she brought up a really great point that I know I've shared with Theresa, and I've shared with Sasyath, and listening to my elder about healing. So the Native Boarding School Healing Coalition is enabling us, creating these avenues, these virtual spaces to share just a little bit what's on my elder's heart, what's on my heart. I just became a junior I'm just a junior. I'm a young elder, but I remember in this is just a little snapshot of the experience that I've had at the oldest continuously operating boarding school in the United States, Chemawa. I'm a brave. I'm a proud brave. I really I shared this with Theresa, Sheldon, when we were getting out the vote, and we went to all the reservations in Washington State, and I shared with Theresa. I said, you know, Theresa, I dreamt this when I was at Chemawa Indian School. I dreamt this traveling throughout the country with healing poles and honoring poles. And when we were at boarding school, we didn't have a lot. We didn't have the best computers. We didn't have the best beds. We didn't have we didn't have the best of everything. But like the saying goes, we made the best of everything. And our ability to help share a little bit of healing, a little bit of our heart, and a little bit of acknowledgement of my dream, because I went to Chemawa because my dad went to Chemawa, and very proud of the late Vernon Lane Swaloose. And he talked about how it was the time of when they were getting ready to graduate, and he's sharing about the stories and how these 15 and 16 and 17-year-olds were signing up for World War II in the 40s. And they were signing up. They were just kids. And a lot of them made it. A lot of them, they lied and said they were 18 years old. It's a true story. And my dad, you know, he's a veteran. He's a And I was really proud of that moment, you know, to graduate, to have him there with me at Chimala, because of all the horrible, just the horrible horror stories. But how we just happened to, you know, have pretty, I mean, wasn't the best experience, but I have the best friends in the world. I had the coolest teachers, the people who've inspired me, like Dr. Arlen Isaacson, who taught me, like, just keep dreaming, Fred. Don't let go of your dream. Don't forget to tell your story, and don't forget to celebrate. And I know Teresa's here, and I just, the more I think about, and my elders here, the more I think about how those kids from San Juan Island probably want to come home yet. And I'm not sure how to make that happen, but
Hello, Fred. This has been
thank you.
amazing and so heartfelt. Thank you so much for your witness and your sharing. I'm going to, and thank you for stepping in. So I'm passing this back to Linda. Who is Linda? You're muted.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you, Fred. The stories are heart-wrenching, and yet they need to be shared, and we do need to do something about that. And bringing our relatives home is important to all of us. So thank you, Fred. And now we'll introduce Theresa from Tulalip Tribes. Welcome. We're so glad that you're able to be here with us.
Aslahel, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. I was looking for
Yep.
a thumb up and then I was like, who am I looking for?
There's 157 of us.
Right.
Which one?
So Theresa Sheldon Seedsta, Tuwal Chud Du Flalap, Teagwood Seeds so much. Freddie, I absolutely love you, adore you, appreciate you. As you shared your story, just continue to send you love and gratitude. Thank you for being here. Thank you for surviving. Thank you for willing to share your story with us. And thank you for being a beautiful human who constantly listens to the spirit and responds back from what the creator asks of you. I think one of the hardest duties in life is doing what we're asked to do when it's uncomfortable. And I think you being here today to share that and take that time is exactly what we needed. And so I currently serve as the Tulalip Secretary of, the Secretary of the Tulalip Tribes Board of Director. Before that, I worked at the National Native American Boarding School Healing Coalition. And so we put a PowerPoint presentation together for all of you. But before we really go into it, because, you know, slide decks are really sterile and really, they are what they are. What I would like to propose is just that you guys can, Debbie, share out that slide deck. People can review it at their time when they want to. Okay. And really just speak to the history. And so National Native American Boarding School Healing Coalition, with the love and respect to Jewell too, just acknowledging him and his work. Artists are your storyteller. And artists are the first ones that would write down what your policy papers are. And so sometimes in a lot of these movements, we look at policy papers, position papers, testimonies, and we don't include our artists. And our artists were the original ones who told the history, told the story. And so the significance, importance of them being involved in truth telling is really, really important. So I'm really grateful you all started out with Jewell and had Freddie join in as well to tell his own story. There's so many spokes and so many views of a story. There's not one way, there's not one person. There is so many to this, and there's so many rhymes, reasons, and ways of getting places. I just want to say thank you to everyone who's here joining us on Indigenous Peoples Days weekend, so we can celebrate early. And so hopefully Monday is Indigenous Peoples Day, and so hopefully on Monday you're able to do something that gives back to whoever's tribal's area that you live in. And going forward with the presentation, really a lot of what we try to do is just tell the truth. And the truth, people can say, has many sides, many angles, but the actual facts of it is assimilation, colonization, and genocide that was contributed to Native people, was intentional, was highly organized, and has been done for hundreds of years. The boarding school era started in 1801 on record, going to 1969. There are still, as Freddie shared, still current boarding schools in operation. The number one intent of those boarding schools, as identified in Secretary Deb Haaland's report, I don't know if you've been able to read Deb Haaland's, she has a volume 1 and volume 2, which is a reaffirmation of elections have consequences. And so we had the first Native ever to serve as the Department of Interior Secretary, which is crazy to think it's taken us this long to obtain someone in that position. But in her report, she identifies the number one intent of boarding schools is access to land. And how do you get access to land? You take children. And how do you take children? You put them in schools under the name of education. And in those schools, if you died or survived, no one cared. That wasn't a focus. The focus was to get land. The focus from the federal government to be able to obtain land by the removal and destruction of children, and then the blowing up of the nucleus of your family, that was just an added benefit. When we talk about boarding schools, we talk about loss of culture, language, food, our hair, our regalia. But really, when you look at it from a government point of view, the access to land, the access to destroying a people was the intent. And the intent, when you take a child away and you are no longer an auntie or uncle, a grandfather, a grandmother, a mother, a father, a sister, a cousin, what happens to the nucleus of the family? And how do you restore the nucleus? And when does that ever come back? And here we are in 2024 trying to talk about healing, trying to talk about why do we have all the isms? And we talk about the isms freely: suicide, health, heart disease, lung disease, asthma, the different things, how trauma shows up in your body. And we talk about addiction, and the death rate of Native people is so low. And why? Because we don't all start from the same place. We say things like intergenerational trauma, historical trauma, these different things. Well, they don't seem to impact you because we're high functioning, right? We show up in nice cars, we're wearing nice clothes, and so we don't look that broken. There's so much layers to the colonization and assimilation that's taken place from boarding schools. And so some Native people be like, doesn't impact me, I have no problems. Because that's because we don't know trauma actually created our behavior. And so science is catching up to a lot of what we have always known as Native people. And when you take us away from our traditional foods and traditional diets, it causes health issues. Diabetes is new. And I don't know if Jewell was able to speak to that, because he does a great job of talking about how our liver and our bodies and have not been able to conform to the current things we have today. It was all intentional. If you look at the reports of the 1819 reports the United States government received on school children, they purposely didn't feed us our traditional foods because they knew that we couldn't manage and maintain the diet. And so when you think of how orchestrated that warfare was on little children, and how the little children who survived that then became adults, and how never knowing all of this was intentional, right? Never knowing all of these things were on purpose. but I can't stress enough how highly organized it was. You now take into spirituality. As Native people, we are raised in deep, sacred spiritualness. We believe in prayer. We believe in a higher power. We believe in so much, right? That we've been labeled the demons for believing. Because we believe the water has a spirit. We believe the plants have a spirit. Science is now telling us cedar trees talk to each other. And we're like, we told you. But when we said it, we were crazy. So all of these things to diminish Native knowledge, we were scholars way before boarding schools. Our people are brilliant. We were scientists. We were engineers. We had all of these things. And then once boarding school came to tell us, well, the way you do things is wrong. The way you pray is wrong. Who you pray to is wrong. And when you take spiritual people and you take spiritual children and you tell them the way you pray is wrong, the social, emotional torment our people have gone through at the cost of organized religion is deep. And it's not an opinion, it's factual. In 1819, the United States Congress passed a bill to make religious organizations, to fund them to run religious organized boarding schools. The impact of those organized boarding schools went from religion, organized religion, back to military. Some were run as industrialized military schools and some were run as religious, and some intertwined back and forth. Tulalip's history for 75 years started out as a Catholic boarding school, then went to a militarized boarding school, then went back to a Catholic boarding school, then ended in a militarized boarding school. There's literally 6 to 7 different regimes for 75 years the boarding school operated on our reservation in. And so Tulalip, when we talk about who do we pray to, the Catholic Church is the #1 religious organization on our reservation. In that, the religious organizations were divvied up by regions. And so you can go to Makani Bay, you won't find a Catholic church because the Methodists had that reserve. And so sometimes we don't even know which church we're associated with was a part of federal policy. And as Native people, everything was decided by federal policy. And that alone, no other human like Native people has had their lives dictated by federal policy to the extent we have. And so the boarding school, and I've seen the links in there, really speak to a lot of this history, really speak to a lot of what can we do, because there is action to take today. And so there is a bill out, it's called HR 7227, and the Senate bill version is Senate bill, I think is it 1723? Numbers just lost me. It's called the Truth in Healing Commission on Indian Boarding School. This legislation in Congress right now, what it's asking for is to create a 6-year federal commission to investigate into the boarding school history and era, identify where the burial sites and burial locations are of our children, because we still don't know that. And to identify how many children were forced to actually go to boarding school, who attended. We don't have numbers, we don't have data. Thank you, Deb, for dropping the link to the bill. And so the bill would create the 6-year federal commission to go out and to receive testimony, to gather documents. There's been quite a few scholars who've created books, written reports on specific boarding schools, but none of that's housed in a specific area. And so being able to collectively gather that up is really a big deal of having that. Right now, the Department of Interior is doing the oral history project, and they're out going to 22 states to gather testimonies, video testimonies of boarding school survivors and getting their stories cataloged. Very similar to what Holocaust survivors did when they did the project to go out and get testimony of the survivors. We've never done that, and so we're just now doing that today. And it's a 2-year project that's going on, but that's just the beginning. And so what we really need help with, so the Senate Bill 1723, it's ready to go to the floor in the Senate. It is gone through the Senate Committee Indian Affairs. It's had markup. There's a budget associated with it. And so it's ready. What we need people is to reach out to your senators and ask them to bring the bill to the floor for a vote. And so 1723, ready to go to the floor, ready for action. On the House side, you have the Education and Workforce Committee that's overseeing it. And so Chairwoman Fox, we need people to reach out to your House members and say, please bring the boarding school bill to the floor. We know we're in election time. We know that time on the floor is very short, but we want to get this bill passed before the end of the year. And so everyone on this phone can reach out, email, call your representative and tell them to bring it to the floor, bring the bill forward to be passed on and voted. There has been no opposition for the bill by anyone. There is no written opposition. We've received over 30 plus national religious organizations letters of support. No one's gone against the bill at all. And so we've done a really good job that this is a truth seeking bill and that we want this bill to come forward. When you look at histories of how countries have dealt with genocide, number one is you have to tell the truth. And so the United States government still hasn't done that. And that's what this bill is just saying the truth. So then we can get, because you can't just get to healing without acknowledging what's happened. And so that's the goal of it. That is the intent of it. And I see in the chat, we have our next speaker here. And so I don't want to take too much time, but I do want to thank all of you for being here, because sometimes when Native issues come up, it's really easy to go, well, I wasn't there. I wasn't a part of it. That I didn't do that. And instead, take a step back and just say, wow, I didn't know that. I didn't know that's what happened. And I can actually take an active part in helping to correct it. Because we're not looking for blame, we're looking for action. And so a lot of times Native issues get blamed as being too progressive or too radical when it's the right thing to do. So everything they've done to us was legally allowed. It was allowed by the law. And so sometimes the law isn't correct, especially when it comes to Native people. And so being able to right those wrongs and address those things is something every single one of you can participate in. And I think you're willing, because you're all here listening to Jewell, listening to Freddie, listening to myself. And so I thank you. I thank you to Linda Smith, who invited me to join you today. And I'm really grateful because it's really about education and awareness, and then it's about action. And I think that's the beautiful opportunity we all have as citizens of this great nation. So just end it there and pass it back.
Thank you, Theresa. I appreciate it. My hands go up to you for all the work that you have done on behalf of our relatives. So our next speaker will be Edward. And I'm so appreciative of your time, Edward, and thank you so much for waiting. Please.
You're welcome, Shakpatwai, which is good day in Yakama. In Miwaniksha Shmaya, Ku Shiapatunki Miwaniksha Edward Arlen Washines, Ku Sadis Washina Sadis Kinikba Ichna. My Yakama name is Shmaya, and my English name is Edward Arlen Washines, and I reside here. Reside here in the community of Sadis, where I was born and raised on the homelands of our Yakama people. And it's an honor, privilege to be here with you this morning. I'm retired from the Yakama Nation after 43 years of doing the 8 to 5, but I'm still pretty active in various committees and boards, and I'm also a professor at Heritage University. First of all, I'd like to say that I don't consider myself a survivor, even though I'm a boarding school graduate. I consider myself a success story. And it's a long story that goes behind that as to why I feel that way. And but taking nothing away from the issue at hand, the Truth and Reconciliation Advisory Committee that I serve on through the Washington State Attorney General's office. And one reason that I chose to participate and be considered to be on that committee is the word truth. And we need to tell the truth. We need to go back, because even though the first, and I don't refer to them as schools, and I wish people would stop referring to them as schools. They were not schools. They were what I consider no different than what was mentioned, the Holocaust, the genocide against the Jewish people, the various other peoples of the land, because they were more than Jewish that were afflicted. And I considered them to be concentration camps for our children. And I truly believe that. But there was a change. So in history, it began well before Fort Simcoe Residential School concentration camp was built by the United States government in 1860, which I understand is the first what so-called school here on our Yakama homelands. And so going back, even before that time, even before the treaties were signed, there were, I mean, this plan that the United States government put forth was a plan of genocide, plain and simple. There's nothing else was in the minds of non-indigenous people of our country at that time. Went clear back. You can go clear back to the doctrine of discovery. You can go clear back and look at that and identify what the plan was to take over this country, this land. So, and the real tragedy to me started in 1830 with the Indian Removal Act, when the United States told the military to go out and forcibly remove indigenous people from our homeland and to put them in what is called Indian Territory, which now is called Oklahoma. Now, the idea of then President Jackson was to remove all of the indigenous people in the United States to Oklahoma. And when that plan was devised, and they said, when we're successful, then we're going to take over all of the land. So it's true, land had a big part in what the US government wanted to do with our people. Well, as many of you know, it didn't work. Although some tribes were relocated to Oklahoma, Indian Territory, there was a lot of tribes that weren't. And the Yakama Nation was one of those, one of many that was not relocated. And so it started well before, and it started with the big onslaught of the devastation of the food source for our Lakota, Nakota, and Dakota brothers. It started, people referred to that as, well, it was a fur trade. People were hunting for furs. They were getting licensed for the furs for the buffalo, and that wasn't the truth. The truth was they were getting rid of the primary food source for those people, for our brothers and sisters. And so plans were devised. And this concept of a school, the concept of a residential school, was a part of that plan. They devised it to rid our people of our culture, our history, our language, and everything else that we relied on. And so if the United States government, and the reason I'm real adamant about calling them schools is if the government funded over 407 residential schools in the United States, why aren't they funding them today if they truly meant to educate our people? If they truly meant to make these into schools. So I don't call them schools. I don't refer to them as schools. And I refer to myself again as a success of a boarding school. I graduated from Riverside Indian School in Anadarko, Oklahoma in 1973. And it was a choice of my own to attend. I wasn't forced. I wasn't taken from my home. When I went there, I was amazed at the people that were there at that school. All of my teachers, 95% of my teachers were indigenous. The superintendent, Mr. Ed Lonefight, was the superintendent, is of the Lakota, up in Montana. Mr. Tarza of Kiowa was our principal. Our coaches were primarily Native. And so the boarding school, right now, today, I refer to those as schools because they truly do educate our people. Across the land, you have tribal leaders, tribal elected officials, people that are in the National Congress of American Indians, the Indian Gaymen Association, the National Indian Gaymen Association, the Affiliated Tribes of Northwest India. All of these organizations have members that are leaders in those organizations that are boarding school graduates. And so it's a good thing. And so my hope is that the federal government, because I heard that question, what can we do? What can we do? Help us. I ran our scholarship program here, our higher education scholarship program for years. And every year I've always had to write letters requesting increase in funding. And the opposite came about. Our funding was drastically reduced every year. I mean, those are things that if they really want to help, as indigenous people, we have a healing process that we have. We can heal. Native people can heal our own. And so in order to do that, the resources need to be provided through our Indian health services. I was amazed at my Dene relatives, their hospital in Gallup, New Mexico. They had hogans and sweat lodgers right outside of their hospital where our people could use. So those are the kinds of things that the federal government can do to help us, because we can heal. We have the ability to heal. We're strong people. And so I don't dismiss or don't disagree with the suffering that has taken place. I feel that when I go on to the Fort Simcoe place we call Mulmo, where our first residential school was built in 1860, I can still feel that hurt of my ancestors. I can still feel that. It hurts. It makes me want to cry when I go there, even though I was not a product of that facility. But my grandparents were. They were. Our people were slaughtered there. They were murdered. My ancestors ran away during the winter, ran away from that place. And it hurts. But, being prayerful, trying to have understanding, knowing that I have elders that have gone through that, we can heal, but we need the help of our government. If they're true to their word, that's what I want to see. So I want to say thank you again, there's been a big change from 1860 to the present. We still have schools. My school, Riverside Indian School, is still in existence. It went down to a grade school now. And I'm very proud of the Braves of Riverside. The boys are ranked second in cross country. The girls are ranked third in cross country in the state of Oklahoma. When I was there, my brothers, Herman Quiver and Charlie Brown from the Arapaho tribe, they were state cross country champions. That was something amazing. And so, you know, if they really want to tell the truth and accept the truth that they want to educate our people, then do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Edward. I wonder if you might just give us a few words about your work on the commission through the Attorney General's office.
The tribal truth and reconciliation, we kind of had a hard time, first of all, with the reconciliation part. But we working to have some testimonies from survivors or members of survivors throughout the, I believe there's 6 different meetings, listening sessions that we are going to hold, and work towards finding out what the real need is in terms of the future of our people, in terms of the future healing of our people. Some of the things I did mention, but we need to focus on it, because there are, I mean, I'm not saying that, you know, we need to forget about the devastation or the trauma or anything like that. I truly believe that the federal government and the state of Washington has agreed also in our part to continue on to the future. Our final report from our TAC group is due in June of 25. That's our final report. And so we'll be putting that together. But the state of Washington has already committed to continuation of this committee. Whether I'm on the committee or not, I don't know, but 2025 is our final due date for our final report. And so we've been having several meetings, individual meetings, as well as group meetings, Zoom meetings. We had one face-to-face meeting. And so we do really want to hear from those individuals that are survivors, that, you know, are their parents were survivors or grandparents, because it's something that you know, it's like 9/11, you know, you never forget, you know, you won't forget, you know, it's things like that to us. That's how important it is. And so we're trying to focus in on my contribution is the future, the children that have been affected, especially through our language, because it was effective in a way. The boarding school, the residential school was effective in many ways. And one of those biggest ways was our language. I'm very proud of those tribes that still speak their language. I'm very proud when I hear them. But a lot of our tribes have lost that because of that trauma that took place, the genocide, the attempts to rid us of our culture. It's evident. And so my goal is to hopefully be able to help restore the language, help restore some of our culture, our tradition. The Indian Religious Freedom Act was just passed by Congress just a few years ago in 1978. Man, I mean, that's ridiculous. I mean, to say, oh, now you can practice your ceremonies. I mean, I don't know. Things like that need to, I don't know what you can do about that, but you know, I mean, the Citizenship Act was in the 1900s, you know, the voting of Native people. I mean, those are recent. Those are things that affect our people, and I wish they would address those. And so that's my focus, is the future of our children. to actually educate, call them residential schools, educate our people if that's the case.
Thank you. Thank you so much for all that you've shared and for your work towards the future. My hands go up to you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome, and thank everybody.
And now we'll begin our Q&A session, and Deb will lead us through this portion.
So before we go into questions, I'd like to offer up the floor to Jewell or Fred or Theresa. If there was something else that you wanted to contribute at this point in response to what some of the other folks said.
Hey, Jewell.
Yeah, I was sitting here talking to Fred, and when we went down and looked at all the children born in the Chimawa cemetery, we're thinking about wondering how many children are outside that cemetery that were murdered, killed, and just buried. And now we have the technology to go through and find them. And we're part of a culture that really believes in the spirituality of our ancestors. And I was taught by elders in how to do recovery work, dealing with the dead. And those elders are all gone now. But I helped find a child that was basically her body was being stolen by a university, hidden away. And that child touched me. And that led me to her body. Yeah, because of the elders' teaching, I knew it was real. And we recovered her, and she died like 1,200 years ago, this little child. And it made me think about, I was thinking about that stuff when I was at the Chimawa cemetery. And what really grieved me is that those children and those students were worked really hard, and they built up funds, and they bought all this land that was added to Chimawa, and some of them died in the process. And later on, the BIA sold the land that those children bought to non-Indians that developed it on the west side of I-5 for their economic gain. It's part of the same story. The Indians have to step aside. We want your land. And, both cemeteries and land bought by those working students need to be investigated as well. I think there's a lot of work that's got to be done in regards to what did those children suffer? What did they accomplish? There's positives and negatives and everything. But I'll tell you, I was really moved to tears about those little children that were buried there. And as a consequence, we gave a couple small totem poles for the cemetery to mark and a long-term promise spiritually that we hear you. We know you didn't go home, and we'll find you somehow and bring you home. And I was really angered when I seen up in Canada when they lined up all those children in the 1940s and shot them down and shoved them into a massive grave because their budget was cut. This is the type of colonialism that we're confronting, and the history is not going to go away. And it's painful for both sides to admit that this took place. Yeah, but no matter what, that's what our elder was saying. It's about the truth, bringing out the truth, and then reconciling that with our quest for healing. And so I appreciate being here and appreciating the opportunity to share what little I know with all of you. Thank you.
Fred or Theresa, did you have any further comments you want to?
I guess I could just thank you, Jewell, and thank you to Theresa and our relative that shared the story. And Sasia, thank you for sharing. I just was going to show you my father's Chimawa. This was his medallion that I hold pretty close to my heart. It was my father's when they were competing for and representing Chimawa. I guess I just Jewell did a totem pole of our beloved late chief Salik. And we took it on the sovereignty run with the National Congress of American Indians. And we on this journey with President Fawn Sharp, it was her last term. We brought it through. We started in Tahlequah, and the reason I bring this up is because that's the birthplace of the greatest athlete of all time, Jim Thorpe. And for those that don't know the story, Jim Thorpe is one of he was one of the greatest. It was named by the king of Sweden. I can't remember his name, and he called him the greatest athlete in the world. And Jim Thorpe, you know, went to Carlisle, and he had all his gold medals taken away. And if you don't know that story, I just bring that up because I guess the term Indian giver comes to mind. You know, there he was representing Jim Thorpe, the United States, and declared the greatest athlete. And he went to Carlisle Indian School in Pennsylvania. He graduated. So I just think remembering those legacies, and thank you, Theresa, for sharing your what's happening currently, and really encourage everybody to really take these moments and encourage your friends, post it check out their Facebook page, share some of what we're trying to do to bring the healing. And again, my hands are raised to the organizers and each of you, coming together and sharing these important stories. And just your presence is our medicine, it's our healing, and it's just helping share just a little bit more with the world of what we really know. So Haishka, thank you.
Okay, I believe Theresa has left the call already. Edward, did you have any other last comments you want to make?
No, I just
Okay.
appreciate the opportunity and to share, some points of view, and that's why I'm a Steeler fan, because Jim Thorpe went to Pennsylvania. Yeah. Just had to mention my Steelers. Yeah. But no, all in all, I'm appreciative, and I'm glad I was able to participate. So thank you.
Okay, so one of the more recent questions we have here is regards the transition from what we understand most boarding schools were in the early times to some of the changes that have been made in the boarding schools recently. Is this transition something that's been a regular occurrence throughout all boarding schools or a lot of boarding schools, or is this something that's unique to I guess to the Pacific Northwest, but that would not include Riverside, so it goes beyond that. But can anybody kind of answer that question as to how that transition came about for at least those boarding schools who have been able to make that transition?
I guess I just what first comes to mind is after, you know, a lot of our tribes now have our own schools. We have our own tribal school systems. The and like Lummi Day School was one of the first here at Lummi. Lummi Day School started back in the late 20s and early 30s of the 1900s. And so as boarding schools began to close and tribes were recognizing their self-governance, self-inherent, you know, their inherent right to provide this education to their own families and in their own communities. You see, like here we have just in the Northwest, like, you know, there's Neabay High School, there's Muckleshoot, there's Wahilud Indian School, Chief Leshai School. And so a lot of the school systems came into back home into the tribal communities. And this didn't happen overnight. This is just, you just recently seen a lot of the influx of a lot of tribes exercising self-governance, receiving their own monies. Quileute, Tahola, Chief Tahola High School out in Quinault. A lot of our tribes here, I believe, and I just think of it this way, are real progressive in that way. And that's where a lot of the trends, I believe, start here in the Northwest, because Northwest tribes lead. And so you see a lot of our even now you see higher educational institutions. Well, Northwest Indian College has been around since 1972 with the Lummi Indian School of Aquaculture. And so the boarding schools began closing. You know, I mean, I think Chemawa is probably the oldest continuously operating boarding school in the country. And so I really see a lot of our own people educating our own. You see a lot of our own. I mean, it's a real blessing to see the vision of our elders when they talked about seeing our own doctors and attorneys and representatives. And so I think that's really important too. And Edward, if you want to add?
Yeah, I really believe that, like for Riverside, which was established in 1871, it's also located on the same grounds as the area office, the Bureau of Indian Affairs area office, and again surrounded by many tribes, including the WCD, Wichita, Caddo, and Delaware, and the Kiowa, Apache, Comanche tribes who reside right there in the vicinity. And I think it was their efforts to continue the operation of the boarding school in Riverside. I know the Sequoia is still there, but I believe that the Cherokee Nation took over operation of Sequoia, which was also a boarding school. And then Concho, of course, which was for middle school, kindergarten through middle school, and that's closed down. But at Yakama, we have our own tribal school, Yakama Tribal School. It's probably one of the smallest. It has a number, 130 members. But yeah, I believe that the efforts of tribal leadership and wanting the whole concept of residential schools to backfire on the United States government, which it has done. I think that attempt has backfired on the government to try to change our people, but I think that was probably one of the biggest efforts.
Okay, so and along with kind of alongside with that is the question, of there were 15 or up to 17 boarding schools in the state of Washington. And so the question is how do we get that knowledge out there that these things that these schools took place and the kinds of things that happened and the changes, and for those that are still in existence and actually serving the Indian communities, how do we go about supporting them? Does anybody know? Is Jewell still around or did he take off?
Jewell had to step away. He
Okay.
wasn't feeling too
Okay.
well. So,
Okay.
you know,
Oh. Or do you?
yeah, that's a really good question. The Native Boarding School Healing Coalition, is really, really helping us take the lead on a lot of these initiatives that are helping identify and provide, some guidance, and again, some healing. And so, Deborah Parker, a good friend of mine, Tulalip, and our friends at NABS, I just really, really encourage everyone to sign up with them, to recognize and take part, in your local communities where we gather. I just posted in the chat, with our healing, I think, on the healing aspect, people, being present, coming to our gatherings when I invite you to the Gathering of Eagles, May 17th to the 26th in 2025, to the San Juan Islands, and to come into Bellingham with us. I mean it, because this is how we're coming together as family, as neighbors, as friends, and as newfound friends. And I tell people when I share my number, if you're moved to call and talk more, these discussions are real important. So when you see when NABS is having their next everybody's story is different. Just like Mr. Washines was sharing. My dad's story is different from, his grandfather's, his family stories. So being present in all of you, that all 57, and I know people have places to go, but thank you. Thank you. I raise my hands. That just touches my heart to see all of your beautiful faces. And thank you for letting me cry and heal and share, because that lets me know that each and every one of you care, and you wouldn't be here. So thank you, Edward.
Yeah, I think that there's two parts. Number one is, when we do hold a listening session, a lot of those are with individuals. It's not in a forum, an open forum, general assembly type. We schedule those to meet individually with the individual, and then ask permission as to whether or not we can utilize the information, or so there's that part, and that's really a very sensitive part of the healing process. And then of course there's the public forum, where individuals have the ability, and I truly believe that that's something that should be shared, and especially the history, not that non-indigenous entities, governments, state or federal, not that they don't know about it. It's just that, acknowledging it and then trying to focus on how to help our people with that healing process. And generally it takes funding, I mean, that's the bottom line. I mean, we have a lot of educated college doctor people, sociologists, social workers that have that ability, but a lot of times the funding focus just on this particular area is non-existent. And so, that focus needs to be there. And certainly the information should be shared out into the public if the individuals that help us gain that information are willing to, allow it. But I think that everybody from our congressional people to our tribal leadership, they really need to get involved. And I hope they get involved. We have a few here that are, but all leadership needs to get involved from the national level, as well as the local Pacific Northwest level.
Okay, another question came up is how do faith communities restore and build their relationships with indigenous communities, especially in concerning trying to address the past and the relationships with boarding schools there.
I just want to just share, like, Deb Cruz and I and Beth Brownfield, they had in my Unitarian relatives, my Universalist relatives have all throughout, I think, the country, their Native American Community Connections Committee, I think they're called, and those are really, if you don't have them in your churches or in your communities, every place that you live in the country has indigenous people. There might be an Indian center nearby. There might be a tribe. Every tribe is different. Thank goodness Deb Cruz found me before she found other Lummies, because we just happened to connect at the right place at the right time, doing the big canoe journey. And so, like, this next year, I know a lot of you might live out in the peninsula in Port Angeles. Well, the paddle to Port Angeles, the paddle to Lower Elwha is coming up. So, organizing and helping to assist these big events, these community events. When they say that events are open to the public, go, join, come learn, be a part of. Generally when it says open to the public, come to the powwow, come to the canoe gathering, come to the rodeo. All of our communities, there's 577 federally recognized tribes in the country. We all don't believe in the same God, the same deity. We all have different customs, beliefs, traditions, beliefs. And so that, I think that's one really way of, our communities of faith can participate and be a part of and learn a little bit more, and give Deb Cruz a call. Their Native American Connections Committee is one of the best, and they do the best they can, and I do the best I can as community leader to help my friends out wherever I can. So thank you.
I believe that to educate is one of the primary ways of helping the non-indigenous communities become more acquainted with tribal nations, not only in our state, but in the Northwest and nationally. And I teach a class at Heritage University right now where 80% of my students are Indigenous. And a lot of the things that I teach them about or tell them about, they were not aware, and they're tribal members. So even our own people need to be educated. And I think that's probably the best way. My good friend, the late Senator John McCoy, was the champion of the since time immemorial curriculum in our state. And we've had a very difficult time trying to get the public schools to implement that. But that's a good way, that's a good process to start with to help educate our people, not so much about beads and buckskin, stuff like that, but to teach them about what we're talking about here today and express that. Um, Everybody probably in the school in our state probably knows about the Holocaust and what that is, but they don't know about our own Indian people or Indigenous people. So I believe it starts in the school, can start in the school, and I think that's where it should begin.
Okay, I do realize that we said we were going to close at 2, so go ahead and put your questions in the chat. We aren't going to be able to finish them up today, but we'll take and look through the chat and pick out those questions that we can answer, and we'll try to get those answers back to you. In the meantime, I think it's time to move to Elizabeth. There are people asking about actions that you can take. Elizabeth's got some information, and Corey, who's going to do our closing. Elizabeth is with the Faith Action Network, and Corey and Amy, who's running tech here. If you look her, she's around here somewhere, are with Interfaith Works. So these folks will have some information for you.
Well, I do have to get on the road. I have to head north. So
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Edward.
So much.
thank each and every one of you. It's nice hearing all of your words, and keep the work going forward. So
Thank
prayer.
you again.
Okay, bye.
Thank you so much, Edward.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I just wanted to say a couple things. I'm Elizabeth Dickinson from the Faith Action Network. So grateful for all of you being here. We have created a sign-on letter. We'll be sharing that with you. We have some of our Washington state legislators who have, at the federal level, who have co-sponsored, others who have not. So this will be a letter of gratitude to some, and request for co-sponsorship to others. Also just wanted to let you know, so look for that as a follow-up, that there is a statewide initiative, 2117, that would repeal the Climate Commitment Act. That would also then take away the money that is currently going to tribal-led climate projects. This map shows where some of those projects are already, and that to me would be really a blow to some of the good sovereignty work that is happening. We'll send you this this information that's got some of the just some of the links. And I think that this, Corey's going to talk about this last event that you can go to learn more. So we will send that information as well. And on to Corey. Thank you. I guess I'd say one more thing, sorry, Corey, which is that the Faith Action Network will try to prioritize some, if there's anything that is Indigenous, has to do with Indigenous legislation in the state. And I'm sure that Justice Washington and Interfaith Works will also be doing that work, and some of your own denominations if you're involved in one. So stay in touch with us. now I'm done.
Thank you so much. I'm Corey Passons. I'm with Interfaith Works in Olympia, Washington, on the land of the Stetchast people. And we do want to lift up an event on October 26th, which will be at the Tacoma Armory in the Court of the Conqueror. It's a performance piece written by solo performance artist George Emilio Sanchez with projections and visual storytelling art by Patty Ortiz. Together, they confront the history of how the courts have diminished tribal sovereignty of Native Americans. The piece also tells the story of Sanchez's own experiences of navigating generational trauma regarding his Indigenous identity. And there is a discount code that you can see there, which is Justice50. If you go to tacomaartslive.org for information on tickets, put in the promotion code and get a 50% off discount. And that's again on the 26th at 3 o'clock and 7:30, 2 performances. I wanted to encourage all of you to put your view onto gallery so we can all see each other and just begin to gather in our gratitudes for all of the reflections that we've heard today from our contributors, the way that they've shared from their histories, the way that they've bravely offered vulnerability for what they carry, how they are connected with the trauma of their ancestors and of their own experience. It is only through the power of their storytelling that we are invited in to be part of the healing that can come. I am deeply grateful for that vulnerability that they've offered us today. It is truly a gift to be present to any person who's offering from that place in their life and in their world. I wanted to offer 3 questions today that are given by the Coalition to Dismantle the Doctrine of Discovery. This is a coalition of the Christian Church to address the extinction, enslavement, and extraction done in the name of Christ on Indigenous lands. Yet their resources and programs are useful for people of any or no faith tradition. They ask 3 questions for colonizers or people who are occupying formerly Indigenous land and Indigenous lands. They ask, who were the original inhabitants of the land you occupy? What mechanism displaced them from their lands? Where are those people today? So who are the original inhabitants of the land you occupy? What mechanism displaced them from their lands? And where are those people today? And I would offer a 4th for your consideration. How could you pursue being in right relations with them? How could you come to know them better? As I set off on a journey of awareness myself, I was learning about the replacement of the the statue of Marcus Whitman, which is displayed here in the capital of Washington. In Washington, D.C., there's a national statuary hall where each state has 2 statues, and Washington State has 2 there. One of them is Mother Joseph of Sacred Heart, who founded hospitals in this region, but the other is of Marcus Whitman. Marcus Whitman was a physician and missionary who traveled to Walla Walla in 1835 to establish a mission, returned back to Boston to solicit more support, and then accompanied the first large group of people in the westward expansion of the United States of the Oregon Trail. In his statue, he's depicted broad shoulders, staring out with a coonskin cap on and full buckskin outerwear in the style of a fur trader. His shoulders are cast overly broad. He has a very chiseled beard. He's looking up and away, holding an enormous Bible under one arm and a scroll under the other. And the caption says, "My plans require time and space." Time and space. When I began my journey to learn about where am I, where do I live, who was here, the reason why I came to Marcus Whitman is because he was funded by the American Board of Commissioners for Foreign Missions, which was the first American Foreign Missionary Society established in 1810 by the New England Congregationalists. I am an ordained minister in the United Church of Christ. One of the streams of denominational influence in my congregation are the American Congregationalists. I have a direct connection with westward expansion. and extinction and enslavement of Native people through my religious tradition. And it's my duty to live into the healing that I can participate with from naming that and then asking what's next for me. So I extend that charge toward each of you to explore who are you in the midst of your own tradition, in the midst of your community, and how can you participate with others towards the healing that's needed individually and collectively. So I want to move from that charge to a place of gathering in and connection. As we close our time here together today, I want to pause and just focus our hearts. No matter how far apart each of us are today in distance, we're connected as a human family. The beating of your heart is connected with the beating of my heart. Our lives are connected. Our breath is connected. Our stories are connected. Our future is connected. So as we offer gratitude to our speakers today, as they've shared with us and shown us a path towards healing, I invite you to raise your hands in whatever way is comfortable for you, either on your heart, this way, and just to bring a sense of recognition, connection, and blessing to one another, to each of us. Feel the connections between us. Feel the blessings you are receiving, and feel the healing of offering a blessing to others. Take this in. We are not separated energetically in any way. Take it in and consider how we go forward together, how we give back. And that just as our lives are connected, so too is our path of healing. May it be so for all of us. Thank you so much for being here. Deep gratitude for all of you and for the ongoing work, and blessings to you as we go forward.